comment, please. You mentioned how we can read Sayyid Nusri as a Muslim, did you say dialogian?
Theologian,
Someone you
dialogian,
can have
yeah.
tea with.
Yeah. Conversation partner.
Conversation partner,
Yeah.
indeed. All recur.
That's
sort of
right.
thing. Yeah. Well, there happens to be a Jewish teacher friend of mine. I got interested in Judaism about 20 years ago over some little project I was doing. I felt I had to brush up on Jewish thought. And the man that I ended up turning to became my teacher. He's a solidly rooted, as you said, you used the Alistair McIntyre phrase. If I may ask you to remind us.
Tradition constituted.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Traditional constituted theologian.
Yeah.
Well, that fits the description of the person I'm talking about. His name is Jose Faur.
Mm-hmm.
He has apparently earned the title of Hacham in Hebrew, which means even above rabbi, like rabbi of rabbis.
Mm.
And he's my friend. And he writes these very interesting books, the latest of which is called The Horizontal Society, Understanding the Covenant and Alphabetical Judaism. His point is that the way the Torah is written without vowels implies a different sort of concept of divine writing or revelation, where we co-write the Word of God with God by supplying the vowels, which change meanings and tenses and implications and so forth. So with that basis, he's written a whole series of books which may make a good dialogical, what should I call it, library, a little bookshelf that we can, along with people like Nusri,
Yeah.
we can draw upon. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for both those comments and for the richness of them. And thank you especially for rooting for England in the Ashes. I appreciate that a great deal. For the Americans unaware of what that is, that's the great rivalry between Australia and England in cricket. One enormous dynamic, of course, in the Hindu-Muslim relationship in India is the relationship with Pakistan and Kashmir in particular, and that is that's part of the deep complexities of that particular conversation, which is one of the reasons why the context is hugely important, and you acknowledge all these complexities in that place. And then finally, thank you for the suggestion of the name, and I agree with you. There are what's good is that we're moving into a place where I think people, the Hans Kung type approach to interfaith dialogue, which was much more global, or John Hick, the Englishman who organized the pluralist hypothesis and so on. I think that approach has almost had its day, and we're now much more searching for people who come out of a tradition and because of their fidelity to that tradition can give good reasons for going into the conversation, and then once in the conversation, let the conversation go where God takes it. And that, in one sense, is much closer. I mean, Thomas Aquinas said horrible things about Muslims, so let's not set him up as a model, but he managed to have his horrible things about Muslims while at the same time reading them and taking them very seriously. Now, let's get back to respect. So we'll get rid of the horrible things that Thomas Aquinas said about Muslims at the start of Contra Gentiles, and focus much more on, so let's have respect, but let's also have rootedness and in place, and then seeing where the conversation goes. Yes, please.
Hi, I've been involved in what you called grassroots interfaith dialogue, first in Germany and now for the past 2 years here in Washington, D.C. for a while now. And it's been my impression that usually once you have people of faith together, they can agree about the importance of faith and they can find that course of action to take together to improve the community. But where it gets difficult, and that's something I see in the so-called dialogue between Islam and the West, is when you have people who don't place much importance in faith or who are non-believers, explicit non-believers themselves, debating people of faith. So I was wondering whether you could design some kind of a structure that will include both secularists or atheists and people of faith in a mutual dialogue to improve the community that we all live in together?
I think that's a very good and interesting question. I mean, America's so odd, isn't it, really? Because, you know, you think about the bestseller list over the last 10 years or whatever. You've had the Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris do very, very well from the atheistic, secular, humanist end of the spectrum. You've had running parallel with that, the sort of Left Behind phenomenon, the 60 million copies now which have been sold, fictional portrayal of the end of the age, American fundamentalists, evangelical fundamentalism. And that speaks to America's, one joy of America is how do you get both of those groups to the table? How do you encourage evangelical fundamentalists to join the conversation? And quite a lot of Islamophobia is coming from that group. And how do you get Sam Harris, who's written, I think, really cruel things about Islam in his book? So how do you get both those constituencies at the table? And I think that's a good challenge. I mean, I think it's an important one to try and do. And learning to honour the voices on both spectrums, learning to understand the deep commitments of piety and love of Jesus that sort of inspires evangelical fundamentalism, and understand the sort of commitment to Enlightenment values and toleration and feminism and gay rights that often inspires secular humanism, and recognising strength and in those conversations. I think the key to all this is A, finding interlocutors willing to come to the table, B, making sure that they're given plenty of space to actually explain their understanding of the world. And one of the best ways of doing this is story. I mean, we're shaped by who we are and the families we were brought up into and the background we had and the games we played and the places we've lived and the languages we learned and the values we started appreciating and the impact of parents and so on. So letting all that be part of the conversation. And then, yes, finding ways of allowing the difference to be recognised and then moving beyond it. So you don't deny it. I mean, I'm not into interfaith dialogues where secular humanists meet people of faith and all they do is debate whether or not it's true. I'm also not into dialogues where they meet and they never talk about it. The secret is to meet, spend some time talking about it, and that can be very enjoyable, very rich. And often in the process of that, you know, the secular humanist learns that the sorts of gods they don't believe in, some of their interlocutors don't believe in as well. And so therefore it moves the conversation to a different place. And some of the, you know, believers have not actually listened to somebody who says, look, one major reason why I'm committed to this is for certain ethical reasons, which, you know, I think are important to recognize and celebrate. So you can have all sorts of quite healthy dynamics. The secret is to allow it to be aired, but not allow it to be the only thing which is aired. And then to really think a little bit about how we coexist and live together with disagreement. It's a hugely difficult question. I mean, the dynamic and power of intolerance, you know, and tolerance is a very interesting concept because you tolerate, okay, so you've got a spectrum. You've got love and acceptance this end of the spectrum. You've got hatred and hostility at that end of the spectrum. Tolerance isn't love and acceptance. When you use the word tolerate, it means you disagree, you think they're mistaken, but you allow them. Now, actually, it's a very begrudging allowance as well, you know. So it's a very important concept for this world to get its head around. And working out reasons why you tolerate is actually really, really difficult for people. We all find it difficult. We all want to draw a line too quickly that we disagree and therefore we have to hate or be hostile to. Finding ways of living with disagreement in a constructive way is, I think, very, very important.